first item I have for members of the board is a presentation related to our ratings for accreditation for the 24-25 school year as released by the Virginia Department of Education. And of course, these are based on data from 23-24 school year. Dr. Grant will get us started.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Cashwell. The Virginia Department of Education recently released state school accreditation ratings. Today, Dr. Hinton and Ms. Seeley will present an overview of the accreditation process, school performance outcomes, and discuss the measures in place to support ongoing school improvement efforts.
Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Cashwell, one of the primary strategic goals of Destination 2025 is to attain academic excellence. To achieve this goal, the plan outlines the implementation drivers or actionable steps directing the school division to assist schools in creating and executing school quality plans aimed at achieving accreditation and other objectives. Key indicators such as school accreditation ratings serve as a metric to gauge our progress towards academic excellence. Each year, schools receive state accreditation ratings based on their performance and progress in key academic achievement indicators, including English, math, and science. In English and math, performance is evaluated based on the number of students passing SOL or other approved state assessments or showing growth across multiple tests. Chronic absenteeism, defined as the percentage of students missing 10% or more of the school year, is also an accreditation indicator for all schools. High schools have additional factors influencing their accreditation ratings, such as graduation and completion index, dropout rate, and college, career, and civic readiness. The College Career Civic Readiness Index indicator measures for the graduating cohort student preparation for college and careers while in high school. Credit is given for advanced coursework such as AP, IB, and dual enrollment course completion, CTE courses and credentials, JROTC coursework and credentials, work-based learning, and service learning experiences. Each indicator is assigned a level of 1, 2, or 3 based on school performance or progress towards benchmarks, calculated annually or over 3 years. A school's overall accreditation rating is based on the performance levels of the indicators. This slide provides a summary of each accreditation indicator, detailing the percentage and count of schools at each performance level. Notably, a significant majority of our schools achieved level 1 in English and math when considering all students collectively. However, upon disaggregating data by achievement gap groups, more schools fall into levels 2 or 3. Furthermore, compared to last year, we have seen improvements in several indicators, with an additional 16 schools achieving level 1 in chronic absenteeism, 1 school in the graduation and completion index, and 8 schools in CCCRI, taking us to 100%. For the English and math achievement gap indicators, student groups are also assigned levels based on their performance and progress. The overall rating for each indicator is determined by combining these group ratings. When analyzing school performance by group, we observe that a majority of schools achieve level 1 across all groups in English. However, compared to other groups, more schools are at levels 2 or 3 in the Black, students with disabilities, and economically disadvantaged groups. Nevertheless, there has been an increase in the number of schools achieving level 1 compared to the previous year for some groups. Specifically, both the multiple races group and the students with disabilities group have seen a gain of 6 schools achieving level 1 since last year. When examining the group data for math, we observe similar trends to those seen in English. Compared to the previous year, we have either maintained or reduced the number of schools at level 1 across all groups. As previously stated, a school's overall accreditation rating depends on the performance levels of the indicators. Schools achieve accredited status if all indicators are at level 1 or 2. If any indicators reach level 3, Schools may be classified as accredited with conditions. The Virginia Board of Education determines whether a school receives denied accreditation based on its implementation of a corrective action plan. This year, all Henrico County Public Schools have achieved accreditation, with 78% accredited and 22% accredited with conditions. We are delighted to announce that 2 schools have attained full accreditation this year. We have the pleasure of recognizing James Gordon, principal of Glenlee Elementary, and Dondre Lightfoot, associate principal of Varina High School, who are here with us this afternoon. Please join us in congratulating them and their communities for their efforts in this achievement. Five schools went from accredited to accredited with conditions due to having at least one level 3 indicator. As you heard earlier, the process for achieving the 3 levels is nuanced. So results varied by school and circumstance, with some at level 3 for science, math achievement gaps, chronic absenteeism, or dropout rate. I would like to highlight that Board Docs includes an attachment with accreditation details for all of our schools. Furthermore, this information can be accessed through the Virginia School Quality Profiles on the Virginia Department of Education website. Lastly, the Virginia Department of Education recently approved a new school performance and support framework, which outlines a comprehensive approach to evaluating and supporting school performance across Virginia. This new framework will first take effect for school ratings in the 2025-26 school year based on data from the 2024-25 school year. The new process aims to simplify and improve how schools are evaluated. It addresses the current overlap between state accreditation and federal accountability systems, introduces a broader range of performance designations, and focuses on both instructional inputs and student learning outcomes. Schools will be rated in categories ranging from distinguished to needs-intensive support based on weighted metrics such as mastery, growth, and readiness for elementary and middle schools, and mastery, readiness, and graduation for high schools. Federal support designations will also be applied where necessary. The Virginia Department of Education is in the process of developing training and materials to support school divisions with understanding these changes. So additional information about the new system will be shared as it becomes available. At this time, Ms. Sealing, Director of School Quality, will provide an update on the process being used in both the division and schools to support improvement efforts.
Good afternoon. The foundation for any meaningful, sustainable change is a process that not only establishes the need for that change, but also aligns the change with research-based best practices and a system for monitoring, implementation, and impact. The Virginia Continuous Improvement System, or process, is the system that guides the work for schools for accreditation and accountability. Grounded in improvement science, this process provides schools with a systematic approach to identifying and implementing their school quality plans. The process was introduced by the Virginia Department of Education in anticipation of this new accountability system that will take over for the current accreditation system. All school principals, associate principals, and many central office staff have a foundation in improvement science and are working collaboratively to implement the 24-25 school quality plans through the use of this process. In addition to the continuous improvement process, the work of school quality is now guided by the Virginia Support Framework. This framework contains 4 research-driven critical domains. Academic supports is the first domain. In this domain, schools and divisions focus on the use of high-quality instructional materials and routines that are built around optimal instructional practices. Staffing supports is the second domain. It focuses on schools and divisions, focusing on recruitment practices that lead to hiring, placing, and retaining high-quality teachers and principals with critical expertise in the schools and classrooms most in need of support. Organizational learning supports is the third domain. Schools and divisions in this domain identify logistical and organizational practices that are necessary for creating an optimal learning environment. Finally, school climate supports is the fourth domain. In this domain, they seek to build bridges between school and home, remove barriers to learning, and assure greater school attendance and engagement. As a result of these changes, the yearly strategic plans schools are creating in response to their accreditation results and the vision they have for their schools are now called school support plans. The plans are built around these domains and implemented through the continuous improvement process. In the spring of 2024, the staff from our Department of School Quality met with the team from each school to begin the implementation of the continuous improvement process. During that time, each team conducted a needs assessment, then matched those needs to research or evidence-based strategies in order to create their school support plans. Because the domains are so critical to the work of schools, it was easy to identify best practices already in place within Henrico County. Here you see a few examples of how work we are already doing aligns with these domains. The academic supports domain has a natural fit with the teaching and learning framework, which encompasses the HCPS aligned curriculum and the HCPS instructional model. In the staffing supports domain, we see a need to retain high quality teachers with critical expertise. One of the best resources we have for this are our instructional coaches, including our content coaches, ILCs, and teacher fellows. The organizational learning supports domain expects schools to have practices in place to create optimal learning environments. One of the most significant ways we can do this is to implement the newly revised teacher support and evaluation system. The research is clear on the impact of strong professional learning and teacher retention. Finally, the school climate supports domain expects schools to create environments that assure greater school attendance and remove barriers to learning. Two of our best practices to support this area are multi-tiered systems of support and positive behavior interventions and supports. While these expectations from the Virginia Office of School Quality may seem like yet another new thing, they align seamlessly with the work we are already doing and place a focus on the critical need for strong systems and processes at both the division and school levels. That concludes our presentation, and we are now happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm going to commence to my right with Mrs. Shea.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it. This is a lot to digest. I think particularly looking at the landscape over the last, I guess I've been on the board 5 years, and how much things have changed and continue to change. I think it's hard to understand where we have improved and where we have seen the opposite of that when all of these metrics and all these goalposts are changing. And so can you help me just understand just some of the changes we've seen to the accreditation model in the last year or two, whether that includes the standards in the actual tests or how we're evaluating how we fit? Can you just paint a little bit of a landscape on what might look different this year?
So the accreditation model itself has not changed. What they introduced last year was a process for implementing and monitoring what we were calling school quality plans, we now call school support plans, in anticipation of the model changing next year and going to the accountability model that Dr. Hinton shared on this slide. So over the past 5 years, the indicators have remained the same: English, math, and science. English and math also currently have measures for student groups. Right now, those groups have to have at least 30 students in them at each school in order to count in that school's accreditation. At elementary school, the other indicator is chronic absenteeism. At elementary and middle, at high school, it's dropout, on-time graduation, and college career and civic readiness. So that has remained the same. They also added, I guess it was after COVID, the ability for students to show growth and the school to receive credit for that in their accreditation.
And if I might add to that, and I know Dr. Hinton, you may want to add as well. So while generally, as Mrs. Seeley said, the model hasn't changed and there's been some nuance with growth, I think your question also spoke to the actual standards being taught within each content area and whether the test specifically had seen any changes, in which case the answer is yes to some of those in courses and so on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's, like I said, it's hard to, I mean, we've got over 70 schools, right? So we're all trying to digest the nuances of changing tests, changing assessment, but also changing community needs within 70 plus different communities. So lots to wrap our head around. I know this is just one piece of a lot of things we use to assess where our students are. What are some other measures of student achievement that our school leaders and that you as a division kind of keep an eye on to keep a pulse on for students beyond just the SOL scores?
We have benchmark tests, checkpoints from our benchmark tests, in addition to iReady data that we utilize for our intervention groups, in addition to our Lexia that we use to support students based upon their reading level, and small group intervention tailored to each individual student. Whereas before we might have looked at just groups of students, we're making sure that we target each student regardless of where they are, from our special ed students to our students with disabilities.
That's helpful. And is it possible that we're seeing students who are successful in some of these other academic metrics that may not be as successful on the SOLs or vice versa?
Yes, the SOLs are just one snapshot in time, but we do see growth in the other, how can I say it, other tools that we use to assess students.
So this is not telling the full story
No, it's
of
not.
of an individual student, much less a whole school or a whole division.
Yes.
So we've seen successes at quite a few of our schools, including our two schools who are joining us. Gentlemen, congratulations again. What a wonderful, SOLs are just a snapshot in time, but I would assume y'all are seeing progress on all those other tools and metrics as well to make this big of a difference. So thank you. As we look at our schools, like these two who have had successes, are we gleaning best practices from those and how we can push out in other schools that may have some of the similar challenges that these gentlemen have overcome?
Yes, we are, and we're using EBI's evidence-based interventions to target specific subgroups that are having difficulty. For example, our L students, we have resources specifically tailored to them. For our SPED students also, and just for all of our students who might need tutoring or remediation in specific areas or SOLs. We're trying to be more targeted in what we provide for our students, but most importantly, we're making sure that we are monitoring what we have in place to ensure that we're seeing growth. And if we're not seeing growth, we come back, reassess, and change it up if needed by individual student.
We also have structures in place at the monthly principal meetings, the monthly opportunity principal meetings, and the monthly associate principal meetings for those principals to collaborate around the practices that they are implementing in response to their accreditation data.
Thank you. And I noticed this year, from a parent perspective, that that instead of using the Virginia growth model assessment measures, I can't remember, that we're using iReady assessments instead. I know the report as a parent that came back, I will say, was much more understandable and digestible for my individual student. Do we see the potential for those iReady assessments to measure as well as or better than the Virginia growth assessments did, or is it just different?
We should be able to see growth because it is aligned to the Virginia SOLs.
Great. I think that, I did have, when we look at looking towards the new model, I see it's got mastery and growth. What does readiness mean?
So it changes depending on the level. So readiness for next year will be chronic absenteeism for elementary school. At middle school, it will be chronic absenteeism as well as advanced coursework and math. And then in high school, it is a 3E, are employed, enrolled in a listed framework, chronic absenteeism, and then a version of the federal graduation rate.
Thank you so much. That's all from me.
Thank you, Mrs. Shea. Mrs. Kinsella.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I agree with Mrs. Shea. It is a lot to unpack, what is now and then what is coming. And I just want to thank you once again, not just the principals of Orion High School and Glenlee Elementary, but your entire school, your staff, your community, because it wasn't just you, though you're here representing today. And I can't wait to hear more detail from Dr. Cashwell about exactly what you were doing to achieve this progress. Once again, congratulations. So all of our schools now, Ms. Seeley, all of our schools, regardless of accreditation status, participate in the school support plans.
They do, yes.
Have all of our schools found this to be meaningful?
Yes, we created the plans in the spring after we did the needs assessment, and then each month we've been meeting with the schools to check the progress of their plans, to help them implement the initial steps of getting them started. And our initial feedback on this new process has been very good. I think because we were ahead of the curve in teaching the improvement science behind it, that it wasn't such a surprise to everybody when this process came out. I've heard from other school divisions that they didn't do any of that foundational work, and this was a drastic change for them. So I think because we were explaining the theory in terms of how change happens and the process that you use to monitor that change, and we have put the schools into what we call PDSA cycles. So for each strategy that they have, they are checking, how did the plan go? What did we do? What does the evidence and data say about how it went? And what are we going to do next?
Right, not just our schools that are required to report back,
them.
right, but all of our schools.
All of them, yes.
Well, that's good to know, because if you read articles coming out, the DOE projects that 60.5% of schools are off track or would need intensive support according to the accountability system that's coming.
Yes.
Do we expect anyone who's been in rooms close to the state superintendent, are superintendents or a leadership team speaking to the staffing crisis we had prior to the pandemic? Are they speaking to the antiquated funding model that we've had? Are they speaking to the burnout that we've had, that we are just struggling to come back and address? Is anyone speaking about this in the rooms, perhaps the unintended consequences of changing a system like this at this time? Anyone?
I can speak generally to, during the input sessions that were held at this, when the state was looking to adopt the new model, and then the efforts, you did hear advocacy around some of the topics you just brought up, right? Is this setting the stage for more teacher burnout, inadvertent pressure on schools and systems when we're just in recovery mode still from the pandemic and see some unprecedented staffing shortages, not just in our state, but nationally, in recruit, retain, reward areas with teachers. So I think it has been a topic, for us, as our team has worked to forecast what's coming. I think they've done a really good job, educating our school leaders, who will, of course, work closely with their teaching staff to understand certainly the framework and the measures that will be in place, but to keep the main thing, and that is students. We certainly, our expectation for academic excellence is not going to change. change. It has not changed, and that our focus on the individual students and making sure that we're meeting them where they are. We have tools to do that. You got to hear about some of them. And it's not simply the SOL test. That'd be one snapshot, which is often a year behind when the teacher's getting ready to plan for meeting the needs of a student. What are those real-time measures to help us understand what student needs are? And then how are we leveraging our curriculum resources, remediation resources, tutoring to meet the students' needs and help them grow? So those expectations for academic excellence and growth haven't changed and won't change no matter what the model is or will be. But to your point, that has been a hot topic and certainly something I think we're sensitive to at the central level. I know our principals are sensitive to as they're helping set the stage for changes as they're coming.
Thank you for that, because I'm extremely concerned. I mean, just this year with the new math standards and the new reading standards and the new benchmark program and the feedback being received, it's like there's so much new. Not that we can't do it, but there's so much new. And that's just a lot. To your point, it won't deter us from pursuing excellence, but it is a lot. So I'm glad to hear those conversations are happening in rooms to which we're not in. Do we anticipate any changes with this new accountability system in terms of assessment remediation? Like, for example, now there's a range where students can retest. I call it an almost pass, for example. Do we expect any changes to that?
So we are hearing some information from the state, but we haven't gotten a lot of clarification around having more guidance in terms of what remediation should look like. So we're waiting for more information from them on that. But I will want to kind of to piggyback on Ms. Shea's comment around readiness. As the accountability model continues to expand over the years, they are going to be adding in some additional 5C performance tasks that will be part of our assessment program, not this year, but potentially the following year.
In lieu of or in addition to, like more testing or less testing?
At this point, it would be in addition to, from what I have heard, but we're still waiting for a lot of those details.
Can't wait to hear some of our students who need it most are going to be impacted. And speaking to that, do we expect funding models to change? When I was reading about our new system, instead of fully funding all Virginia schools, now it's going to be targeted funding. Can anyone speak to the funding that we're expecting?
I don't think, again, I don't have a crystal ball, and I know much is still in development, particularly the budget at the state level is yet to be determined going into the next year where this accreditation conversation would be part of the equation. But I think there has been and will continue to be targeted efforts for schools meeting certain criteria in the framework. In the current framework, we've seen that with SIG grants and so on. And then I think in the future, we would hope to see some of that, more of that. Of course, to your point where you were quoting from an article that foreshadowed the percentage of schools that might fall into these categories. I don't know what that will mean from the state's point of view as to how much funding they'd be able to leverage to schools falling into those improvement categories if that number increases astronomically. So I think it's yet to be determined what kinds of supports would be available in terms of funding for targeted assistance.
And then I would just like to thank every single employee across our entire division for the work that they do. Because they've all worked very hard. And I know in some of my schools where we were green and then perhaps, chronic absenteeism got us, which some of that is beyond our control, or where we've made improvements in the math and reading, but yet we're still continuing, we need to make improvement in science because of the lack of labs, for example, during the pandemic. I just think all of our employees, all of our leaders, our entire team has done tremendous work. And we still have more work to do, but I could not be more proud of our division. That's all I had, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Kinsella. Mr. Young.
Thank you for the presentation, everyone. Before I get started, I just wanted to say how proud I am of Glenlee Elementary School reaching full accreditation, making a significant accomplishment not only for the school but also for the entire Fairfield community. Glenlee's dedication to fostering academic excellence while serving as an opportunity school shows that we can achieve when we commit to providing equitable resources and support our students. And Mr. Gordon, if you don't mind, I know Christy said she wanted to hear later, but I would love to, if you don't mind coming up and just telling us some of the great things that you've done at Glenlee for me, if you don't mind.
All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. Thank you for this opportunity to highlight Glenlee and our awesome staff, our community, our scholars. Shout out, of course, to Dr. Wilkerson. Shout out to my mentor, coach, Dr. McQueen, and also the awesome leadership team members here. But it takes a village. And so, Mr. Young, you've been, I call the building, the school, the streets. You've been in the streets with us, you know, doing visits. You've been there for volunteer breakfast to support. Also, Dr. Roscoe Cooper as well, from his support as well. And everybody just been an all hands on deck kind of approach. And so we go every other month into the community at St. Luke and serve food with Feed More. You'll see us out doing bus visits to encourage families to send their scholars to school. And then every Friday we do something called AAA. That stands for Attitude, Attendance, and Achievement, where we acknowledge our scholars. So we just take an overall holistic approach, and thank you again for all of your support.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Mr. Gordon. And what I'm hearing is that a holistic approach is working at your school, whether it's out feeding the community or handling the academics in school. So I definitely appreciate your efforts there. And then I guess back to the presentation, how are we leveraging the success of a Glenlee or even a Varina to inform best practices for improving performance at all schools in Henrico County?
Just like Ms. Seeley mentioned earlier, during our principal meetings, our leadership meetings, we're working together to give them that professional learning to help them go back and implement it in their schools. Like, for example, this past elementary principal meeting, we took a deep dive into our data, our DARE data that Ms. Hinton provides for us, where we were able to talk to principals about tiering their students so that they could offer targeted remediation and supports for them based upon their individual needs using evidence-based practices. And another thing we work with our principals with is how do you leverage the reading coaches and the ILCs that we have in the building. They are gurus in their particular areas, and going into the classrooms with teachers, providing that support with all the new resources that we have, leveraging that so that they then can work in their PLCs and help one another.
Thank you. And you mentioned our reading specialists, and maybe this is a question for Dr. Cashwell, but what I really want to know is, can we provide some sort of specific budget item that was recently approved that's addressing some of these issues? I heard reading specialists, because that's new this year, but what other items was in the budget that we have budgeted for to kind of address some of our issues?
I can speak to some of this. So certainly, we tier our supports and staffing to schools based on need every budget cycle. And so whether it's opportunity school positions that we know, we heard mentioned before, some of our schools have additional master teachers through the teacher fellows. The way we provide resources, whether it's through additional Title I funding for additional staffing, both at the classroom level with additional coaches and specialists, along with our system-wide reading specialists. So, I mean, every budget we build, we're differentiating the supports based on school needs. So we're looking at things like accreditation data, staffing turnover rates, all of those factors that we know make a difference in what the supports are that are needed. So. And then I think this was brought up before about, targeted funding that comes particularly for remediation efforts. So state remediation funds, and then any additional, do you want to speak to SIG grants or sort of what that looks like and how that's targeted and assigned from our budget?
Sure. So after federal identification happens each year, which that happened 2 weeks ago, then the schools that are federally identified for support will be offered the opportunity to apply for what we call SIG grants, school improvement grants. And depending on their identification, those grants range anywhere, at least they did last year, from $50,000 to $100,000 for the year. Our training on that opportunity is next week and the week after. So from there, we will learn how much funding is available and the kind of the requirements around accessing that funding. Because federal identification focuses on reading and math intervention, then that funding is targeted around providing additional supports in reading and math.
That could be programmatic.
It could be programmatic.
Staffing, and that would be in addition to whatever supports we'd already put in. So I think there are some opportunities ahead to continue to leverage, and we always take advantage of every opportunity such as that.
And just to follow up on that, are we prioritizing placing our top supports like our math coaches and our reading specialists in the schools that are struggling the most rather than those that are perceived to be performing well?
Yes, we are. In addition, thank you guys for also giving us the extra instructional assistance that has given our teachers an opportunity, especially on the elementary level, to have a longer planning period so that they can have an opportunity to plan for Tier 1 instruction and also remediation for students.
Gotcha. Ms. Burton, if you can go to slide 8, maybe you all can help me. I just want to know, I'm looking at middle schools. Is that slide 8? Oh, gotcha.
Accredited.
Yeah.
Status.
Keep going. Accreditation status summary. No. Right there. Yeah, there we go. On slide 8, what factors are causing middle schools to lag almost 30% behind elementary and high school students?
And I would say middle schools across the state are struggling, but here in Henrico, we are really honing in on our middle schools. They had started making progress before COVID. COVID hit, we started seeing a decline again with our middle schools. For example, today I was at Elko Middle School. Yesterday I was at Fairfield Middle School, where we are doing learning walks. The Division of School Leadership, the Division of Learning with Dr. Hughes, her team, my team, coming together, going into the classrooms, observing, coming back, sitting down, talking about what can we do to continue to provide those supports. And so because we're seeing it with our own eyes, we can give that immediate support or additional funding or resource if a school needs it.
Yeah.
And middle schools this year also have reading coaches in all of our middle schools. We haven't always had reading coaches in our middle schools.
Yeah, I think that's important. And then if we could go another slide, Ms. Burton, because I want to talk about our subgroups, and even if it's not up there, our Black students are lagging behind 19 times than white, Hispanic, Asian students in math. How are we addressing this?
Through our comprehensive need assessment, our schools that are having difficulty in those particular subgroups, we talked about earlier using those evidence-based research strategies to help support our students. Like, for example, today I was at Elko and I was able to go into a classroom to see where usually you have a classroom maybe 20, 25. This was a smaller targeted group of 10 kids with a teacher and an interventionist that was providing that targeted support in the area of reading and math. Very similar to the structure that has always been in our elementary schools. We're really seeing it in our middle schools, working with our middle school principals to develop a master schedule that supports the intervention where it is not in the regular Tier 1 instructional block.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm glad to hear that. The last thing I wanted to hear was the kids, and I didn't hear that. I heard how we get into answers that we really want, because I hear so often that kids can't, and the reason they can't is the reason that we must. And what I'm hearing is that we are on track. Are we on track? Are we seeing improvements? Because sometimes these accreditation numbers don't tell us the true story. So are we seeing these improvements? Because just seeing a 3, I don't know how close a school is to getting to a 2. Or if a school is a 1, I don't know how close they are to being a 2. So are we seeing these improvements outside of one test at the end of the school year?
Yes, we are.
No further questions. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you,
again.
Mr. Young. Mr. Irving.
Thank you for the presentation, folks. So yeah, I wanted to start with the slide that Mr. Young had talked about with the accreditation status summary for the elementary, middle, and high school. I do think that the middle school numbers are staggering, right? Because and you think this is a nationwide thing, which if you correspond the age of those students when COVID hit, they were in elementary school. And I think we understand as teachers in elementary, like those basics that you learn at that point are something that you have to have foundationally. I mean, I teach high school and my kids can't do math. Like you can't, some of them can't do, I mean, many of them can't do just percentage-based math, and that's the skill that you learn in elementary school. So I think that systemically there is something larger that's going on here where it would be irresponsible to just point blame at specific buildings and saying you're failing these kids when this is something that's happening everywhere to everyone all around the country. So I think it's important to highlight that because we can easily look at the middle schools and saying, what the heck is wrong with our middle schools? And that would be unfair to the people who work in the middle schools because Lord knows I could never teach middle school. I could do elementary and high school, but middle school seems very tough. So I just would be remiss if I didn't point that out because I think sometimes when we look at these numbers, it is more systemic in nature than, you know, we wanna take at first glance. The second thing is, so I wanna go to the weighted framework for the new school performance and support framework. I think that's the next slide. So do we know how the new weighting framework was established? Like how are the percentages determined? And is there an empirical backing for why they are what they are? Has the state provided any of that information?
At this point, I have not seen any direct information from them. We are still waiting for a lot of details from them. I know that the State Board of Education had a lot of conversation around the weighting, but I'm not 100% sure in terms of kind of what guided that discussion.
So it could just be that they just said, this looks fine.
I can't speak
I mean, I'm not asking to speculate. I'm just saying, like, if is there empirical backing that says that, for example, we shouldn't count growth at all for high school because our kids are just not supposed to grow when they are 15 to 18 years old?
Again, I can't speak to the rationale for that. I know that in terms of the weighting, that they did talk a lot about mastery in some of their guiding principles. You know, they really were focusing on every student reaching mastery, and that was an important component. And you can see that certainly laid out in the way that they've weighted that indicator.
Yeah, I think to me as a high school teacher, that's obviously very concerning when we just expect teenagers to have mastery of material and know just their improvement in it just doesn't matter at all. So in terms of state support, because I see for the new performance categories, if you're in the on track, off track, and needs intensive support, it says schools may have access to general state supports. Schools will receive additional support from the VDOE, and schools will receive intensive support from the VDOE. Could y'all lay out for everybody what it looks like when the state comes into a building? Mechanically, I want people to really understand what it looks like for the people who are within that building who have to.
So we have not had the state in the buildings for quite some time.
Yeah.
And right now, what we are seeing are structures being built by the Department of Education, like the domain structure that I shared, and then developing supports within those structures. So there was a press release that came out a couple of days ago regarding some funding around reading, and it specifically speaks to these performance categories. And it's a grant that the VDOE has taken that will then as schools are identified in either off-track or needs intensive support, those resources will be made available to those schools. What we are hearing from the Office of School Quality is they're pulling back and working with divisions and not necessarily even working at the school level anymore. Right now, the only school level contact are with our federally monitored schools that are in comprehensive monitoring versus 2 years ago where any school that had a red indicator was meeting with the VDOE twice a year. So they are now pushing on the divisions to use their resources to support the schools, and then the support from the VDOE will come through the division.
So in terms of compliance for seeing that that's actually happening, what is that expected to look like?
Sure. So right now, last year, the 24 schools that had either red indicators or yellow indicators in English All or Math All, we were required to submit their school support plans to the state by June 30th. This year, one of two things will happen. Those 24 schools, if none of those indicators changed, we will do an audit on their school support plan by December 30th and submit that audit to the VDOE. For the schools whose indicators changed, they will then need to update their school support plans and submit those plans to the VDOE. So right now it's a certification that Dr. Cashwell signs off on, that we have completed the plans. Certain plans go to the state, other plans stay locally, and we monitor all of them.
Okay. So I guess it is great that we haven't had the state coming into our buildings, but in anticipation of the future changes, I just kind of wanted to have it laid out for everybody what exactly it looks like in terms of the extra work that is put on the people within the buildings to prove that you are doing what your support plans say that you're doing. And then, so could you kind of walk us through that a little bit?
And I would just note, I think to the point that you're making, the amount of central supports at the division level that we have had to build a structure for in order to take on the role of assisting our schools through what is a labor-intensive process and hold true to it with fidelity so that when I'm certifying and the division certifying that these steps have been made, there's a high level of support and accountability and monitoring that happens. And the work that Dr. Grant and her directors and Anne Marie Seeley and her team have taken on together to support this has been significant. And that lift for every school division in Virginia has gotten heavier and heavier as the shift in the way supports have looked has changed. And I think, again, looking to the future and seeing where, more schools may be in categories that are showing need for support, there is a question as to what does that look like? How are divisions maintaining those structures? Because while we want to do everything we can to take the extra lift of reporting and paperwork and plans off of our school principals and their teams, there are requirements there that then fall to the central team to work in tandem with our schools.
So we actually do the compliance paperwork for the schools.
Yeah.
So the Department of School Quality has 11 folks that are assigned to schools individually, anywhere from 4 to 9 schools. And we do the compliance paperwork so they can focus on the process and the instructional leadership in the building. And that some of the cumbersome lift that you're talking about is just that technical paperwork.
Yeah. And what I'm talking about, and also as well, because I've sat in these leadership meetings within my own building and talking about what it looks like when they come in and they expect to see like lesson plans on a specific unit that they are testing, and then we've had it laid out to where if you have even 8 pages for one day of class, that may not even be good enough.
So they don't use that process anymore.
Well,
what you're referring to is called academic review.
Okay.
And when this new process and framework came out, they abandoned the academic review process. And we do not use that process with schools anymore.
Great. And to piggyback on what Ms. Kinsella said about the report about 60% of Virginia schools, I'm just thinking, how is it logistically even possible to, because it seems like they're just going to outsource all of that to the divisions, which puts, how are we even going, like, how is it even feasible if it's going to be that many schools that would come under review and have to have state support? Like, how is it even feasible to do that logistically? Like, the manpower that would be required of us if they're offloading their compliance of meeting these standards onto us, like how how's that even feasible?
So we are fortunate that our school quality department has, as I said, 11 members that are serving the schools to do monthly meetings, to meet with the school teams, to help them through the process of implementation and monitoring. And so we are already lifting the 72 schools, and we have been for the last 4 years in terms of having each school have a plan, meeting with those schools. So that lift on us will not be a change.
Though I think it's fair to say we don't know what's ahead in terms of reporting and, what will be required of schools falling into the various designations or what would be required of divisions. We grew our team very purposefully to lend the support that's needed in the structure that's out there now. And certainly, we'll work to adapt. But I do think it's fair to say it's been a strain on the division and resources and figuring out how to best maximize those to spread them across schools. I think Mrs. Seeley would note that she and her folks, as well as Dr. Grant and the directors and all of our folks in teaching and learning are very busy supporting this effort, and it is an all hands on deck scenario. So
the good thing is that we have systems in place. We did not abandon school quality during the pandemic. We continued, even though it was tedious, but I think many of our schools are seeing the benefits of we didn't give up, we continued the process, and they are, I will say, it's different than it was back in 2020, and they're focused on the process and not the product.
I appreciate all that greatly. I think being ahead of the curve on this in anticipation of what the changes are going to be is paramount. And I think I have the personal luxury of being the only person who's actually sat in a building level accreditation this year on what we anticipate for next year. And I think to what Ms. Kinsella said about worrying about staff burnout and what that's going to be, I experienced that in the meeting, just listening to all the changes. And these are department chairs who are, arguably the most committed people within buildings. And, hearing people say that job at Capital One is looking very good, like that's extremely concerning to me. And the goal of a thing should be to actually do something that we think is beneficial. And I think when you are, trying to make determinations based off of things that are being measured by tests that are changing every single year and not even the same thing that they were initially created to be, I think it puts us in the state and our children and our teachers and everybody just in a bad position. And I worry greatly, but I hope that we can, do whatever it is that we can to blunt the impacts.
Thank you, Mr. Irving. Before jumping into questions and feedback, just want to say thank you overall to the team. This isn't new to the team, and you've been in the trenches. So it's important just to acknowledge you and your team. And while we're doing acknowledgement, I'm going to ride the wave on over here and say congratulations to Glen Allen and Varina High School. And I sat to think about what did I want to say, so I wrote it out so that I wouldn't go on a tangent because we have other things to discuss. When building trusting connections that fosters positive opportunities, students will strive to develop their own potential, and they will practice being brave and brilliant at the same time. And I think receiving accreditation is a reflection of that. And so thank you to you as administrators, thank you to the students, thank you to the families, and thank you to the entire villages that are wrapping their arms around everyone, because all of us want to see our children succeed. So thank you. So now I'll turn this way as well, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to the presentation, more of a solution-oriented perspective regarding the data that was shared in the presentation. Based off of what I've seen, heard, and read, I am anticipating significant changes, and specifically on targeted schools. Now, I'm just going to be honest about that. And I recommend that the district initiate an educational equity audit, specifically focused on Black students, economically disadvantaged students, and students with disabilities. We do have a trend in Henrico County Public Schools. It is certainly getting better, but an educational equity audit will allow us to really identify root causes so that when there are these changes that happen very frequently, if we really understand the root of the problem, then we can solve half of the battle and don't have to continuously fight it. In addition to that, I think that the areas of focus within an educational audit that I would recommend, and of course, we have experts that will explore to make sure that this is something viable and something worthy to do. Those areas specifically are around instruction, student support services, and enrichment. And enrichment is key. Understanding all of those other activities that happen within the school and around the school that help motivate, build character, all of those things. Another area is leadership. And then the last one is financial management. I'd love to have that particular topic incorporated in an educational equity audit to help understand, again, targeting specifically Black students, students with disabilities, and economically disadvantaged students. If the teams are not as familiar with an educational equity audit as you explore, there are 2 other schools that have done this successfully. One of them is the Jamesville DeWitt Central School District. That is based out of New York. The other one is Ames Community School District, and that's based out of Iowa. So that gives you just 2 points of reference as you explore to make sure that this is something that would be a good fit for Henrico County Public Schools. The other thing I think each board member touched on, which is the frequent changes in measurement and guidance from the VDOE, it really does complicate long-term strategic planning and hinders the ability to achieve sustained academic goals. Right now, you can have one school be accredited this year, the next year accredited with conditions, and we hope not accredited at all, but when the goal continuously changes, you can't sustain. And so I'm curious, Dr. Cashwell, as a division, we are going into understanding it better, but what are we doing to help families and communities understand the massive, what I believe, changes that we're going to undertake over the next couple of years so that when a family member sees results that may not appear to be favorable because it's a one-point-in-time test, specifically with SOLs, you don't get an opportunity to see the growth within testing. How are we bringing our families along in the conversation?
Yeah, and I think that's something we've had to do all along, and particularly coming out of the pandemic in years where there were SOL tests to lean on and there weren't, and looking at growth and what did it mean for students, and helping make sure that our teachers and school principals, kind of where the rubber meets the road with students, are equipped to have data points and measures that they can speak to for each and every child, whether it's the iReady assessment. We heard a parent perspective from a board member about those frequent touch points that help parents follow along and know really where their child is academically. So really helping continue that conversation and getting families familiar with those touch points. And then coupling that with, as this new framework comes on board, and it would be premature for us to say a whole lot, and you've got a high level picture here, but certainly as this comes to fruition more and we've begun to formally train our principals and our teachers with more specifics as they develop, that will allow us to work with our families as well. And so I think there have been lots of changes over time with dashboards for families, the way they receive SOL data. What does it mean at the elementary level when you're not passing a test versus what does it mean when you're in a credit-bearing high school course and there are end-of-course requirements. And so there's been an awful lot to message along the way. Some of those new may not change even with the new school rating system. What it means for the individual student may not change a great deal, but there will be plenty of work to do, to your point, to bringing the community along with the conversation as well. And we'll want to make sure our school principals and teachers are really well versed and equipped as well as to tell their story, which they do a great job of now, and understanding some of the pieces you brought up here, which is this is a moment in time. This is certainly based on SOL testing from a year prior for our accreditation this year, and the degree to which they're able to point to and hold up other measures that they want families particularly really tuned into, particularly related to reading and math performance and other content area performance. So as we know more, I think that will help us develop our plans, but certainly have not underestimated, to your point, the crucial need to bring the community along in the conversation.
Can I add to that, Dr. Hashwell? In grades K through 3, schools have to create a reading plan for their students. And so parents that have students that are at risk, they will be aware of those plans. And based on those plans, there will be a monitoring system in place through our Unified Insights.
And that's related to the Virginia Literacy
yes.
Act requirements. So I think it's, what we're asking parents to pay attention to is a lot, and our educators. And so we'll try to do our best to continue to compartmentalize what's important to know about your student and their performance in the grade level or course they're in today. And then when you're looking at school system performance, like how is Henrico Schools doing overall? How is Glenlee Elementary doing, for example? And looking at perhaps a new accreditation framework that we've helped build some context and understanding around that.
Thank you, Dr. Cashwell. And it's this idea that's floating around specifically, for the communications team, I would say, is perhaps we can explore some ways to make the verbiage simple so that families can understand. If you're not in the weeds or paying attention to VDOE or school board meetings, you may only pay attention when you see something in the news or SOL scores, and then you have a perception of an entire school based off of a news article or some other source. But I think we can change the narrative if we can really look at this from a different lens and explaining in very simple terms, this is how we have gotten here. And perhaps there are changes to come. And maybe that happens at the school level, maybe we do it division-wide, but I would implore our communications team to take a look at what's possible. And then the other area that I had been noodling over in thinking about root causes in student outcomes and academia is around nutrition. I know this is a very different take on looking at this academic data. However, nutrition impacts cognitive function, brain development, and energy levels. I would like for us to take a look at, well, first, let me ask the question, and then I'll give the idea for you to explore. So, Dr. Cashwell, based off of your understanding of requirements for nutrition, I'd like for you to share that first. And then the second question is going to be, do you feel the food served within all schools across Henrico positively promotes good nutrition practices?
So all of the meals served in our school cafeterias meet the requirements for sugar content and so on, and that is heavily regulated, and we've actually seen some changes going into this school year. So in order to participate in and receive federal funds for school nutrition programs, we're required to adhere to those guidelines. And so as far as promoting an interest and instilling, hopefully, in students who are taking the lunches and breakfasts that are offered, a joy for more fruits and vegetables and, fresh items, because there is some choice as to what's chosen on the line. And while every item there may meet the nutritional requirements as it's supposed to, we do want to encourage, more fruits and vegetables and farm to table and all of that. You've seen over the past years, we've reported out some really great data around the unlimited fruit and veggie bars and those sorts of things in our school, and getting kids really excited about helping themselves to more than just a doled out portion in the school lunches and cafeterias. So lots of exploration there. Great data coming out of the schools who have tried that, looking to spread that, as well as getting students involved in taste tests and judging menus and bringing some new items to date. I was in a high school the other day where a student was telling me all about a certain kind of noodle bowl they were very excited to see come on the menu. And so I think, within the nutritional guidelines, yes, those are met. We want students to enjoy the food, enjoy the lunch, perhaps be more apt to help themselves to those fresh fruits and veggies more often. So I think that's a work in progress for us, working within the guidelines that are set for us.
I appreciate your response, and I was intentional because I wanted you to lead that we have some very specific requirements around what can be offered. So that's number one. However, I will be brutally honest that I am concerned about physical and cognitive development when it comes to nutrition within our schools. And that I understand the connection between quality nutrition and the requirements. I'm hopeful that we can explore ways. We have some good ideas happening right now around the fresh foods, the fresh vegetables in certain schools. We have the pilots in certain schools. We have got to find a way to make sure that the food is being practiced in a way and served in a way that excites our children to eat it. Even when we're taking, and students are taking, a point-in-time test, that meal that they are served for breakfast is important before they take that test. And if we can find wonderfully ways to entice them to eat it, one, because hopefully it tastes good, but to really educate them on the importance of nutrition, to eat, to have the energy level for the brain development, I think it helps with the outcomes as well. And so this is a very different approach. It's not data specific, but I'm really focused on root causes. So regardless of whatever changes, if we are addressing wellness along with equity, when situations change from the VDOE or the environment, we are poised to do well. And so those are just a few of my recommendations for you and your team to explore. I appreciate all that you do. I do have one redirect, which is Mrs. Shea.
Thank you. I have one question for you all that I missed, which was you mentioned a new teacher evaluation system. Could you share just a little bit about what that is?
I'm not sure what the comment was made about the evaluation system, but I can jump in and speak to the teacher evaluation system. As the best practices, is leveraging the evaluation system and support. And so you may know, we follow the teacher evaluation system as is required by code in Virginia, and those standards are set forth and consistent across public schools in Virginia. And one of those is a student growth measure. So, there is a focus on no matter what course or grade level you teach, whether it's SOL tested or not, this idea that you're held accountable to student progress and student performance, and there's choice as to what measures are used there. So I think that's one piece of this puzzle, that, teachers are focused on that idea of growth and student performance throughout that evaluation process. But beyond that, it's making sure that lesson planning and delivery are content aligned and aligned to best practices that result in student growth. So I think that's why this piece is important here, and for administrators who are enacting the evaluation process and doing feedback and observation reports, that they're doing so in a manner that's aligned with best practices that are then aligned with those standards that then lead to student achievement. So I think that's why it was mentioned as a piece of the puzzle here. And then how we're supporting and training administrators around that.
Thank you, that's helpful. And then I wanted to briefly take a page from my colleague in the Fairfield District's book and perhaps put our building level experts on the hot seat a little bit that are here. Feel free to like wave me off and be like, I'll email you later if you don't want to be in the hot seat. But looking at y'all's successes, have there been particularly impactful budgetary supports or budgetary or extra positions that have been particularly impactful in moving the needle for students? You can wave me off, or you're welcome to the microphone to share with us as we look towards budget season and how we can really make a difference for y'all and all of our schools.
Yes, thank you for that question, and thank you for the support of our district leaders. I can say firsthand that having a teacher fellow provided to our opportunity schools has been tremendous. That teacher specifically at Verona is like a spy house for our teachers to, especially new teachers, to be able to come and, do some peer observations and take whatever, they see from those observations into their classrooms. More specifically to the staff and support, we're focusing on leveraging the robust programming that we have through New Teacher Academy, along with, our teacher fellows, our coaches, to continue to help develop our new teachers in hopes of creating strong classroom management along with best instructional practices to create a sense of connectedness and belongingness, which will in turn hopefully retain teachers. So yes, I've seen tremendous support with budget support.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's all.
Mrs. Kinsella.
Given the success that I looked at in our data, do we anticipate adding additional opportunity schools? Do we have any on the radar, perhaps?
When we set forth the criteria and brought that into the budget, it's a 3-year cycle. And so we did adjust the number of schools to bring Highland Springs Elementary on board, given the shift in their programmatic and support structure. So that's something we would evaluate as we finish the third year, but certainly, we're always looking at additional supports and meeting needs and, what those best practices are as we've learned from our opportunity schools and the positive impact. We're monitoring that, making sure we're looking at data to make sure that these investments are paying off and the difference is being felt. And anecdotally, and looking at the first year data, they absolutely are. And I think you just heard testimony to that.
I sure did, and I just want to say thank you to the team, because initially feedback just inadvertently to me about opportunity schools was that we had so many resources, but we didn't really know what to do with them, or they weren't as well coordinated. So thank you for coordinating them, because they're certainly yielding results, positive ones in our schools. So, Madam Chair.
Thank you again for the presentation and all of the hard work. Dr. Cashwell.
Yeah, that concludes one of our Destination 2025 presentations related to academic progress and measures.